right, you guys. Hello, I'm here with Greg Little, or Greg L. Little, because if you just put Greg Little, you get all kinds of other things in Google. And he's an author and a researcher, and he just got done. Well, his latest book is this your latest book? I think it is, right?
Yeah, the latest one in that sort of genre. Yeah. I put out a lot of books, so that's the
your
latest
Amazon
one
is
in
impressive.
that genre.
Yeah.
Well, they don't even have a lot of ours have restricted circulation. I got about 30 books that have restricted circulation only to professionals. So professionals in the mental health field, criminal justice, that kind of stuff. So they have a restricted circulation. So they're not on Amazon. You can sometimes find some used ones there that some clients have put up or other professionals have their used copy. But no, we don't. Most of it we don't actually sell on Amazon or any stores. We don't book anything in stores at all.
Is that like a publisher,
which is odd,
or is that just?
It's a distribution contract in the field of mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, criminal treatment, and that's really my background. I'm technically I'm a criminal psychologist. I am retired in real one-on-one. I don't do any one-on-one stuff at all. Haven't done that in years. I'm involved in some training and things like that for mental health and criminal justice professionals. And so that's my real career. The rest of this is just what we would call a ghost hobby, but it's more than a hobby. It's pretty much a professional thing. So I've been doing this for a long time, since the 80s. 86 is when my first book came out, and then I just started doing them. So yeah.
You're the premier expert on the Mounds, so you have that, and then your Atlantis studies. And then now
the Atlantis stuff. I want to say the Atlantis stuff was it was underwater research. We did a lot of underwater exploring. Went to sites in the Yucatan and Guatemala, really very remote, very dangerous places, and we did like they did in the 1800s, where a couple of European-based people or people like us would hire a large group to take us into a really remote area. And we did that, made some films about it, did a number of documentaries on it. And the stuff for the Atlantis search was 25 weeks in the Bahamas, looking underwater, exploring all over the place, looking for any archaeological ruins at all, and trying to solve some long-term mysteries that began in the 60s and the 70s. And we did solve all the mysteries that we were looking for. And then we got led to other things there, like underwater stone structures. And so we really got into doing that. We never found anything that we can attribute to Atlantis, but technically it was the Search for Atlantis project, and that was the name that we used. We had archaeological permits and all that, but we did find 31 crashed planes, including 3 that were Bermuda Triangle planes, not Flight 19, but we did find 3 Bermuda Triangle planes. So yeah, that we've done a lot. The Mounds stuff I got into in 1983. Did a encyclopedia in that initially came out in 2009. We did a large revision and update in 2016, and that has been something that I've been deeply involved in since the 80s. I've probably spent more time in the mound research really than I have in my profession. So that's probably that's true, no doubt about it. But my profession has given me the ability to travel, pretty much go and do whatever I want to do. So that's good.
Great too. Yeah.
So
okay, regarding the Mounds, real quick, I have a couple of questions that I wrote down, or that one of my friends really wanted me to ask you, particularly about the Mounds. Joshua McGraw, he's the one who connected us. He's saying, okay, so where in the historical record is their unit of measurement? And then did they know the Pythagorean theorem? And then where did they learn the advanced surveying technology or techniques? And then where in the historical record is their numerical system?
Wow. Okay. So in the that's a lot of questions that I'm sure as I get into this I'll forget some of them, which is actually convenient. If I don't know, I'll just forget. But no, that's not true. Anyway, they didn't have a counting system, obviously. That is in the historical record. They used, for permanent records, they used beading. There were other methods that they used, but they actually had, you'd see wampum belts and so on, and those usually tell stories. The beads that are put in that is a counting system and a number system, and we know they had that. They had weights and measures. We've known that for a long time. Some of the mounds, such as the Watson Brake mounds near Poverty Point, Louisiana, in Watson Brake, they found a cube about 9 inches by 9 inches, and the cube was made out of smaller cubes, and the smaller cubes were all a little bigger than a dice would be, a single die. Very, like a real cube, and then they
Like
had
stone? Is
these
it stone
cubes.
tube or
They are a type of fired clay, so it's as hard as rock, but they have designs on them and they actually look like large dice. And so the cube was 9 by 9 by 9 to make this. And what they believe is these were all used for measurements and weights, that it would be a counterbalance, how many cubes they would need to counterbalance out maybe corn or maybe crystals or something that they valued. So we know that. What were the other? So I've given you the
unit of
numbers and
measurement.
okay, how did they get the knowledge? Yeah, the knowledge. Okay, so where did the knowledge come from? I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, some people say it's ancient aliens. I don't believe that. I don't believe that all the ancient knowledge came from ancient aliens, although I do believe that there were aliens that have visited this planet. That is another story, but not to the extent that the ancient aliens proponents will tell you. They'll tell you that everything came from ancient aliens, and I don't believe that. I know Andrew doesn't believe that, but we know we are 99 point, and then just put a string of nines as long as you can, certain that there were aliens who visited Earth. And what really pushed us over to totally accept the ancient aliens idea that they were here was Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was the greatest skeptic of all time, an astronomer who was active in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Carl Sagan wrote a paper in the 60s in a scientific journal wherein he said that it was an absolute certainty that aliens had visited Earth. They started probably, he said, around 2 million years ago. And they made from that 2 million time period up to pretty much the present, they probably made 10,000 visits. 10,000. Now that sounds like a lot, but it's not. Over 2 million years, that's one visit every 200 years. That's all it is. So it's not like they're here all the time. And that's pretty much what Andrew and I believe. So I don't believe that the Native Americans or any of the ancient cultures, at least here, got their knowledge from the ancient aliens. So what the natives themselves have said, what the shaman and the medicine men have said about their knowledge, they say that came from the spiritual world, that there were entities, in fact, in some cases, there were entities that literally gave them the knowledge, told them things. Now, I know that archaeologists have worked out various ways using like a central stake and then a long rope to make the circles, the geometric earthworks, the alignments to the sun and the moon, particularly the moon's alignments. It takes 18.61 years to try and get a full representation of the moon's basic cycle. The moon it repeats itself in its movements precisely every 18.61 years. So there are mound sites in North America. Ohio is the place where most of them are, although they are elsewhere. And what these mound sites do, linear lines of Earth, which can sometimes be made into circles, squares, octagons, various other formations. And those, in fact, do precisely point to the moon's movements during the 18.61 year cycle. Now, in the book, what I wrote about that was that obviously some shaman, or you still call a shaman, but some of them obviously were at these sites for 18.61 years to lay this thing out and say, put a marker there, put a marker there, put a marker there. We know that these huge earthworks, which are 10, 16, 20 feet tall, often there's a moat around them. And then there are interior mounds that were used where you'd stand on one mound, you could look through an opening in the earthwork, and you could see the moon setting or on the horizon at a very specific time of the year during that 18.61 years to make. To validate the thing, it took another 18.61 years. Somebody had to sit there and watch this thing as it moved night to night to validate that, in fact, it is exactly where it needs to be. So where that knowledge came from, they say it was the spirits and the gods. They didn't use the term God, but it had to do with the Great Spirit and all the lesser spiritual powers, that they got it from them. Nowhere in the old ethnological literature is it said that the Native Americans got their knowledge from aliens. And when I say aliens, like some sort of a craft comes down and beings come out and then instruct them. That is not to be found anywhere in the ethnographic literature that was done in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and even 1900s with the shaman and with the medicine men. And there's a huge amount of information there that we have. So they got the knowledge from, they either worked it out on their own or it came from where they said it came from, and that is from the spiritual world. It's the same place in the book where I said their knowledge of medicine came from. The Smithsonian's ethnographers that went there in the 1800s and interviewed them, we're talking about mainly the Zuni tribe and the Navajos, but they went there and they found hundreds of these plant substances that were very effective medicines. They literally sent those samples off to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian had them analyzed, and some of our modern medicines come from that early research. But in the Smithsonian publications, they say, oh, they worked it all out by trial and error. It's all trial and error. But the shaman themselves all said the same thing, and that is the spiritual world told us. And really, that is what this new book with Andrew is all about, the spiritual world interacting with us. So did I answer them all?
Yeah, yes, and more. So like, let's go super macro and then reverse engineer it. Okay, so like what I really liked about your book is, well, the concept that the Native Americans talk about, the singularity, and then how, we break out into the three worlds, the upper, the lower, and the middle. So walk people through the cosmology of your understanding of what most like Native Americans had, and then we can kind of divide the trickster out of that.
Okay. It is to me amazing. I remain amazed at this belief system. And back when I started the Mounds Encyclopedia in the 80s, I had no idea. I didn't know in the 90s. I really didn't know in the early 2000s, but in around 2004 or so, I started picking up on this, and there was research being done in it. So anyway, here's the bottom line. There are two types of literature about legends and mythology in the Native American tradition. One of those are called commonplace myths and commonplace legends. And those are basically children's stories. It's what's most widely available. They're stories about animals, about coyotes, about other ants, the spider, about how the world formed and how a chief and his wife were in the sky and they pulled a tree up and a big hole appeared and the wife shoves her husband through and then she comes down to earth. And all those are kids' stories. They all teach morals, right and wrong, stories about animals and trapping and basics of living. That's what those are for. Then the second type of knowledge is sacred knowledge. Sacred knowledge was kept hidden. There were some groups that did eventually reveal the sacred knowledge, and the sacred knowledge is where all this comes from. So it's not real common. Most people don't know about this. So they say they have a story of cosmology about how the universe began, and they said it began with a singularity. And I'm not making that term up or translating theirs into our language. That is the term the ethnographers used, and that is the term they got from the Native Americans that told them this story, the shaman. And so it was a singularity. It was made it was basically a pure point of spiritual energy. That's what it was, a pure point of spiritual energy. For some reason, this is never given in any of the literature. We don't know what the reason is. But for some reason, this pure point of spiritual energy began to churn in itself. And in this churning, it created two opposite forces. If you can visualize the yin and yang symbol, like a circle with two parts that connect in it, and then it rotates, it's like, okay, that's it. That's what it was. It was like the yin and the yang. Well, you can't have a singularity made of two parts. It's a contradiction in terms. So the exact moment that these two opposing forces in balance began to exist, it created what physics calls the Big Bang. And now the Zuni described this as, it started out as a container of all. That is the exact translation. It was a container of all. Everything was in this point. And then it thought outward. It thought outward. That's how the Zuni described it. But it's like the Big Bang. So everything in the universe was created from this, and therefore everything in the universe has a spiritual nature. The essence of everything, whether it's physical or non-physical, is spirituality. It's all spirit. So what happened when it thought outward? What happened when this Big Bang occurred? It created a three-part universe. Two of the parts have to do with those two forces that actually created the Big Bang, the two forces that were in the singularity initially that developed. So one of those is called the upper world in both commonplace myths and in their sacred knowledge. And the other one is called the underworld, which again is what they term in both types of mythology. In the middle is the middle world, the physical universe or the physical world. So here's how it works. The middle world was created to allow the force of the upper world and the lower world to stay in balance. So we'll talk about the upper world first. The upper world is the force of creation. The upper world is creation. And what it's doing is it's taking things, pieces of spiritual energy and matter, which is still spiritual energy, and it puts them together in unique ways. It creates things. It has representatives in the upper world, animal representatives. One of those is like an eagle. Virtually all of the raptor birds that fly high in the sky, all of them were seen as forces of the upper world, as was the sun every day. It was very orderly. Creation is also about orderliness. It's an orderly universe. On the other hand, the lower world is the spirit of disorder. And it's the spirit in physics of entropy. Entropy is a physics term that means everything eventually begins to degrade, fall apart, and go to its most primordial state the moment it's created. So from the moment anything's created, it begins to basically disintegrate again. Now, that process can take a very long time or a very short time. So you have the lower world. It has animals that represent it too. Sometimes they're beneath the surface, like fish. Water monsters are a part of it. And animals that actually live in the earth are often representatives of the lower world. So you have the middle world, which is us, where we live in the physical universe. The middle world was created as a double-sided three-dimensional mirror. What that means is this: the physical world is three-dimensional. We all know that. Everything has it has height, it has width, and it has depth. It has all three. So we have these three dimensions. Add time to it, and you've got the four dimensions that we know about. So that is the three-dimensional world with time laying on top of it. So the two forces, the upper world and the lower world, reflect on this double mirror. Their forces constantly reflect on this double mirror to remain in balance. The middle world existed. The physical world came into existence to allow these two spiritual forces to interact. And this is the place of interaction. And on this place, we were sent. Humans here were tasked with maintaining harmony and maintaining balance in this. So the rituals they perform, the mounds they made, the various geometric earthworks that were built for these rituals, all of that is in this spirit of harmonizing with these two forces. And all the rituals were intended to directly interact with the spirits of the upper world, or in some cases, the spirits of the lower world. So that's kind of a summary of their cosmology. The human soul comes and goes. The human soul is basically, they called it a free soul. It's trapped within the body. The body, being physical matter, has its own animating force. That's called the life soul. This explains a lot of their burial practices about why most people were cremated. Some, however, if they were in the elite, if they were important medicine men or women or shaman, sometimes those bodies were mummified and put in really elaborate tombs with the hope that the soul, the free soul that left that body at death, would return and reanimate that same physical body so the same person could come back. The Egyptians did the same thing. So that's kind of a summary of the cosmology.
I love that. And then I think the other element that you added into was Edward Casey's perspective on, I have this quote written down, which I think, the purpose of life, God's desire for companionship and expression. If you did have a singularity and it broke, like, why did it decide to break a fragment at all? And I think that is kind of a good like segue into how, like, his perspective on what he understood, why there was fragmentation at all.
Yeah, well, there's a song, "One is the loneliest number." So if you're a singularity, you got nothing to do. You have nothing to do. There's no purpose. And I'm one who believes in the cycling universe, that it blows out and eventually it all comes back, and it just keeps going over. And it's a long period of time from our perspective, but it really isn't long. And I ask people a simple question all the time. You were born back some years ago and you can remember that. And time kind of drags on some days and goes fast. But if you think for a minute, well, they tell us the universe is 14 billion years old now. How fast did that first 14 billion go for you?
Yeah.
It was gone. So, it's time. Time is a perspective here. I won't, that's a whole deep thing we could get into, and I didn't mean to sidetrack you there.
No,
yeah, Casey did say that God wanted companionship, wanted to interact, and I suppose manifest. And if you have creation, if you're going to have creation, it seems to me that you need something to break it down so you can keep creating. If you create something and you never break it down, well, it can only be done one time. So creation and entropy working together, which is how the universe works, keeps it going, keeps creating new stuff, keeps evolving. And that's what's going on. And then I think eventually it evolves back to the beginning. But anyway, okay.
Yeah, I do too. I think I agree with that. Okay, so I really liked your time, your TIIME explanation. It's temporal intrusions of intelligent manifesting energy. So basically, we have a lot of paranormal experiences. People see beings, people see UFOs, people see ghosts, people see these things. And by the way, I want to get into the Marphalites because I've totally seen the Marphalites. And that's the first thing I thought of when I thought of the plasma thing. But I like how you're defining it all as the commonality in all this is the non-repeatable, just temporary existence of it. So how do you what do you think the role of that is within the reality?
Well, I think that is the primary explanation of the entire paranormal field of UFOs, UFO abductions, the tales of the contactees, the early tales of the contactees. In the book, I mentioned Edgar Casey. I also mentioned Joan of Arc and her visions, which were not visions like most people only know about the movies about Joan of Arc. They never really read much about her. And it's really an astonishing story. But all of those things, I believe, are explained by this time thing. I believe that the the manifesting energy in it is plasma based. And that's just the energy that is used. It's not necessarily the intelligent entities or force or whatever you want to call it behind it. So yes, it's transient intrusions of intelligent manifesting energy. You never have heard somebody say, you don't ever see this report. A UFO lands in some farmer's backyard, and he goes outside and he bangs on it and so on. And aliens come out and tell him, yeah, invite all your friends over. You don't hear that. He gets on the phone and everybody, and they go out and they bang on the side. You don't hear that. It's always temporary. It's always an intrusion in a small area. Never lasts very long. Same thing with abductions. It appears to some people to last a long time, but it's always temporary. And it's an intrusion into normal reality. It has intelligence. Whatever it is has sentience. It has a form of intelligence and consciousness, and there's some purpose to it. And it's a manifestation of energy. It's manifesting energy. There's some energy coming from somewhere. Andrew and I both are firmly convinced it's plasma-based energy. Plasma we haven't discussed, but plasma is the fourth state of matter. You have solids, liquids, gases, and plasma. Plasma is exceedingly unique. It's a fascinating thing, but we believe that's the energy that is used, but that's not necessarily what the intelligence itself is, although it might be. That's another story. So hopefully I answered that. I'm not sure I did, but
yeah, well, I mean, like I sometimes I think like, okay, if the fourth phase of matter is actually the medium in which maybe consciousness itself or the singularity itself is using to convene with this middle world, like maybe that's what's going on, sort of situation. So when I went to Marfa and I saw I've been to Marfa lots, and one of the times I literally saw a shooting star come down and like join the lights, and it was with the Marfa lights dancing with them. And I was like, what? We were all like, whoa. I filmed as best as I could, but you can hear us all screaming about it, but it was, and I don't know if I actually got the shooting star as it came down to mess with the actual Marfa lights. Yeah. I mean, the Marfa lights was one of those that like super tricked me out. But then even stories about when I was there, like one of the locals told me that she went to get in her car in the morning and there was like a big like yellow light sitting in the driver's seat, and she was just like, oh, okay. So, and she like drove and it just stayed stationary as she went past. But she said it, like a lot of people describe it as having it, the light itself or like the plasma itself has an intelligence. Like it is a being in and of itself.
Yes. Well, yeah, physicists tell us it has an intelligence. Marfa is a very cool place. I've been there. I think I spent 4 nights there. Andrew Collins was with us when we were there. We got some great film too of lights. I'm not the lights on the road way off in the distance. You see cars on the mountain in the distance, not those, but lights down there. I'm not sure that that's what they were. It's possible, but we don't know. But Marfa clearly is a portal site. Marfa is a place where the underground geology is such that it helps these plasma-based entities manifest. And that's what portal areas are all about, or windows, depends on what you want to call them. A lot of consistent UFO sightings come in these places. But basically, plasma can theoretically manifest anywhere given the right conditions. And yeah, it's the fourth state. Plasma is the fourth state of matter. Let me explain real quick. So the Earth generates electricity. The Earth generates its own electromagnetic field. It's at a very specific frequency. It's 7.61 hertz, I believe, 7.4. I don't remember. It's around 7 hertz. Anyway, there's multiples of that too, but that's the primary. It's called the Schumann resonance. That's the primary vibrational frequency of the Earth. So as the Earth does this vibration, under the surface, there are rocks of different kinds. The more crystalline the rock is, like granite is highly crystalline, and the more fractures in it, there's a buildup of pressure. It's called tectonic strain. It's where rocks are simply pushing together, and that generates electricity. Again, the more crystalline the structure is, the more electricity is generated. Well, that electricity has to go somewhere. And there, under some conditions, the electricity literally discharges into the air. And as it discharges, it can keep pulling more energy, and it forms a plasma. The plasma is formed when the molecules of air, and again, all this is physical. We're in an ocean here. We're in an ocean like fish, but it's an ocean of air, and right, there are molecules all around us here.
Yeah, air is not nothing.
Yeah, it's not nothing. We sense it as that way. There's nothing here, but it's just not very dense. So a plasma begins, because of its superheated nature, it begins pulling off the electrons from the molecules. And the more it does that, and the atoms, the more and more it becomes a superheated ball of electromagnetic energy that has electrons, ions, photons being start shooting out of it. It forms different shapes, and it is physically real. It becomes physically real because of its electromagnetic nature. It can pull in dust. There is a term called dusty plasma. The first time I ever read that term was in the 2006 Project Condign report from the British Ministry of Defense. And in it, they said that a lot of the dusty plasmas were responsible for the pickup of UFOs on radar, that in fact, those were dusty plasmas. And it simply means that the plasma has pulled in so much matter, be it dust, cosmic dust, what we would normally call dust. It's been pulled into this ball of energy. And again, all the ions are ripped out of it. It is sending out radiation. It's highly magnetic and superheated, but this ball can appear to be physically real. It forms into different shapes, and physicists, really starting in the 1950s, started suggesting if we could keep a plasma, keep feeding it energy, it would become alive. It would be alive like us. In fact, that's why it got the term plasma, because the way a plasma forms, it looks like a gigantic cell. It looks just like a blood cell. And as it has an outer shell, and inside of it, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in there that is keeping it alive. And so in 2007, a group of physicists, it was 6 physicists, published in the journal Physics Today, it's a peer-reviewed journal, and said that plasmas have all the characteristics of being alive, of evolution, and of interacting with us. They had a type of a structure that formed in them that looks exactly like a double helix, DNA, the same thing that is within all of our cells except blood cells. Modern blood cells, our blood cells don't have DNA in them. People don't know that, but they don't have it. They're the only cells in the body that don't carry DNA. So anyway, they saw what looked like DNA, a double helix form in it. And they watched as the double helix split apart and duplicated itself. It splits apart. RNA then takes it and duplicates it and creates new cells. That's how new cells duplicate in the human body. The exact same thing they witnessed, filmed, and so on with the plasmas that they were forming in the laboratory. It's astonishing. They also saw what they called evolution. The ones that had a strong structure, like when the cells split, if you had one that formed that had a weak structure on the inside, it faded away and couldn't replicate. The ones that had a strong structure inside were able to replicate, and they created even more strong ones after the fact. So that's exactly how evolution works. And in their paper, they said these things look as if they're alive, and given enough energy so they can sustain themselves long enough, chances are we could interact with them. And that is absolutely astonishing. It's not a new form of life per se. It's probably something that has been here for all time. And Native Americans say that is the type of energy that they've been interacting with, that your mental state, this goes to UFOs, UFO abductions, paranormal investigations, ghost hunts, and all that. The intentions of the person, whatever's going on in your mind, when you get close to these forming plasmas, there is an interaction sphere that occurs. And in this interaction sphere, the plasma is interacting with your electromagnetic fields, which are being created by your brain chemistry. And when I say brain chemistry, I mean there is a lot of, it's not really electrical, it's bioelectrical activity going on in the brain. And it creates an electromagnetic field. So the plasmas are interacting with your intentions, your motivations, and your beliefs. And that is a really important piece to it, because the Native Americans knew that, and they made it an integral part of all their rituals that they performed to deliberately interact with these forces or entities or whatever you want to call them. And they believe you had to interact with them or bad things would happen, disruptive things.
So they're like temporary thought forms, temporary like egregores that are manifested in a way.
They exist in and of themselves.
Okay.
They're not being
You're not
created
creating them. You're creating them. You're just
No, we're not creating them, but what they are doing, this is where it gets astonishing. What they are doing is interacting with what our expectations are, what our culture is, what our cultural beliefs are, and what our basic beliefs are. They're interacting with us. So when they interacted with Joan of Arc long ago, when they interacted with her, what she interacted with are traditionally seen as angels. She saw St. Catherine, St. Michael, thousands of other angels she saw. There was another witness, by the way, who saw what she saw. That is in the written material at all. And the witness to that was actually interviewed in the trial of Joan of Arc, and that's all in the record. So she saw something that was adapted to her belief system, her expectations and needs, which at the time, England had invaded France. France was in a very bad way, and she came to the aid of France. Now, she did more. She went beyond what they told her to do. And as she went beyond what they told her to do, it began to backfire, and eventually it cost her life. That's where the trickster element comes into this. And Edgar Cayce, I mentioned Cayce. Cayce had two interactions with what he described as an angel. Both of those started out with a big ball of light, same as Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc saw a big ball of light. That's what she saw initially. Edgar Cayce had first time he saw a ball of light in his bedroom. The second time he was actually outside on a farm and he was working on a car and a ball of light formed behind him. And both times the angel interacted with him. And the first time it was about telling him that he was going to be involved with healing and helping people. That is what he was told. The second time that he interacted with it, it was about the need for him to go ahead and go away from the farm and go to move into town in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. So as long as people follow, as long as you're harmonizing with it and you basically follow the instructions, it's usually a pretty good experience. But most people aren't ready for it. I'm going to talk to Whitley Strieber next week. Whitley has been a friend of mine for quite a few years now. I've been on his show numerous times. Whitley's kind of come over to this whole belief system too. In that the entities that we see as aliens appear as aliens because the people that they're appearing to already have that idea in their minds. So these time beings, T-I-I-M-E, these time entities or time beings are adjusting their physical shape and appearance and their interaction to the individual that they're appearing to or to the group that they're appearing to. So in ancient times, they had angels. Today, we don't.
Right, or fairies or elves kind of thing at one point.
Yes, exactly.
In your book, you talk about the electrolight spectrum and about how, like, there's our visual light spectrum is very limited. So do you think that these things are constantly in existence, and then they're just, whenever they feel the need to relay a message or somehow help evolve spiritually enough to become the company that the source would like to have at one point, then they like figure out a way to manifest themselves? Like they're always in existence, but they just temporarily manifest themselves for a second? I don't know if it's worded right.
I think that's a really good question. I mean, that's an excellent question. So the answer is two answers. One is yes, I think that these are um, manifesting around us all the time. And our eyes, people just don't understand this. In the back of our eyes has the retina, and the retina has millions of tiny little cells that one end of the cell is really sticking out. It's exposed in the retina. And what that cell is an antenna. It's an antenna. It's just like a radio. It's a radio antenna. That's exactly what it is. But there's millions of them. There's two different types. One we call rods. One we call cones. The rods pick up black and white color, which is a type of color. Black's a color, and the cones pick up all other colors. So those are antenna. There's groups of these antennas in our eyes. They go back to the optic. They go back to the optic nerve, reach the occipital cortex, the visual cortex, and that's where we see. So the rods and the cones are tuned, just like a radio. If you take a regular radio and you start changing the channel, what you're doing is you're tuning it to pick up a very specific frequency in the electromagnetic energy spectrum. That's what you're doing. So the rods and the cones are tuned to in our eyes are tuned to a very narrow spectrum of the whole EM or electromagnetic energy spectrum. Visible light is right in the middle. It makes up roughly 4.7 to 5% of the entire EM spectrum. You go two ways with this. One way goes all the way to cosmic rays. The other goes down to what's called very, very low frequency waves, which is a type of radio wave. The U.S. Navy uses that to communicate with submarines because those very low frequency waves travel through water extremely well. So it goes both ways. And toward the lower end is where you have TV, you have regular radio, you have cell phones and all that. You go a little toward, you get to infrared, then you get to visible light, you have ultraviolet, and it goes on up to cosmic rays, which is radiation. That's what we call it. But all of that's part of the electromagnetic energy spectrum. The universe is filled with it. If the rods and the cones were tuned to pick it all up, you wouldn't see anything but constant moving stuff. You'd see lights and waves moving constantly, but you wouldn't be able to see any physical objects because it would all be blotted out by the constant electromagnetic waves around us all the time. So yeah, I think that there probably are some here all the time that are in various places. I think some animals that can see infrared, for example, heat signatures. Owls, good example. Owls can see infrared. Owls can sit in the top of a tree and they can watch rats and mice and rabbits and so on run around because they're putting off a heat signature, which is infrared light. That's what owls are seeing. I believe on some circumstances, humans, the frequency of our rods and cones are changed. There are some drugs that probably do that, but that's beyond what we really want to go to here. So yeah, I think it's all the time, but I think there's something more profound going on. So there's naturalistic stuff going on all the time where these electromagnetic energy forms, which are manifesting through plasma, are popping in and out of existence around us pretty often. There are places, however, where they come very frequently because of the underground geology and the movement of water through that geology, which produces even more electricity and energy, really sustains it. Even neuropsychologists and geologists who have studied this have said repeatedly, they believe that haunted houses that have a history for, say, hundreds of years of having manifestations in them, they believe those houses were inadvertently built right on the top of a portal, an area where these energies are constantly coming out or emerging from the subsurface area. They're emerging in this structure over and over. So people see it as being a paranormal hotspot. So is that, I don't know that.
Yeah, and maybe the plasma, I mean, maybe it's like Earth consciousness itself, if it's coming at stress points of portal areas.
That's a really good idea. Remember, all things, the Native American idea, all things are spiritual energy. The Earth is a living spiritual entity, according to them. And I believe it probably is too. I believe the sun is a it had, and when I say living, um, I mean it's alive. It probably has a type of sentience. It probably has some sort of conscious awareness, but it's beyond us. Even like Native Americans never really describe the Great Spirit. They don't really describe it because it's indescribable. We cannot understand the motivations of it, and that's what they said repeatedly in their cosmology. It's like for whatever reason it developed these two forces. You know, it was a singularity. It developed these two forces. We don't know why. We're clueless about that. But it had a desire to manifest, so it did. And that's about as far as they got with it. And I think that's about as far as I can get with it. I
Yeah.
don't understand what its purpose would be. Yeah, it's beyond me.
I mean, like like in some kind of way, I don't know that we, even if we hit on it right now, like if we were like we said the thing, we wouldn't have a way of
Yeah.
it being validated. So it's like hard
Yeah,
to
we
really
wouldn't
know.
know.
Yeah, we wouldn't know. So I mean,
Right.
okay, so that was like deep for a first meeting. Hello, that was some deep stuff. But okay, so then just a couple of questions while I have the mound expert with me. I want to go into okay, so they make these to like track celestial alignment. Are we looking at what would have been there, or would they have had other structural things on there? Like what, like was it really just earthworks, or are we talking about like there's a whole other stone and wood stuff that's been removed, or do we know?
Okay. Well, we do know in a lot of cases. Some of these sites, Cahokia, Illinois, for example,
Yeah,
was a city. Cahokia has more mounds in it than all of Egypt has pyramids. This one site in Illinois, which is across from St. Louis, it's near East St. Louis, Illinois. Um, Cahokia had 120 mounds. Its largest mound is called Monk's Mound. Monk's Mound it's as tall as a 10-story building. It's 100 feet high. Its base is bigger than the Great Pyramid at Giza.
right.
Again, 120 mounds there. Well, Cahokia was a city. It was a massive fortress. It had walls around it, wooden walls, 50 feet high. When you go onto the top of the big mound, which is called Monk's Mound, because a monk lived there for a while, it had a gigantic temple structure at the top, which of course it's a perishable structure. A wooden structure in archaeology is a perishable structure. It means it's not going to last thousands of years. So no, those were destroyed. But probably at Cahokia, there were 30, 40, 50 mounds that had wooden structures on the top, or temples. There is at the base of the large mound at Cahokia, base of Monk's Mound, there is a giant stone structure that was discovered in the 1990s inadvertently from a drilling project. It's never been entered, but it's roughly 75 feet by 45 feet by 30 feet high. A gigantic stone structure at the base of this mound. Never been gone into, will not within our lifetime, probably never, but never is a long time. So I don't know, but no one plans on going in there now. So in America, we probably had 1 million mounds or more when the first Europeans came in, easily 1 million. There were probably 50,000 what are called platform mounds. Platform mounds are basically pyramid shaped. They have a square or rectangular base. Some of them, like at Cahokia, they go up 100 feet. There are others that went up 68, 70, 87 feet, 90 feet. And then they have a flat top. So it's called a truncated pyramid. Truncated means flat top.
Right.
So on the tops of all those were structures. The platform mounds all had structures, and in those structures, the elite lived, either the shaman, the medicine men and women, the chief's entourage, other main leaders would live in those structures. And then surrounding the site would be all the rest of the populace. Cahokia easily had 50,000 people living in it in the year 1400, easily 50,000 people. So there are lots of other cities throughout North America. When I say cities, there were lots of cities that were around at the time that Columbus first arrived in the Bahamas. Columbus never got to North America except in the Bahamas and Cuba. But in North America, thousands of these cities, populations 10,000, 20,000, 25,000, 30,000. And we know now that there were at least 56 to 58 million people. That's the minimum estimate given that were here when Columbus got here in 1492. 56, 57 million people were already here. Probably it was 150 million because the estimates keep going up. That 57 million estimate was made in the 1980s, and now we know a lot more. So the mounds, all right, back to the mounds. The mounds were made for, yes, for the chiefs to live in, but there are many of these mound sites where they have arranged burial mounds in particular in sight lines to where you could stand at a chief's mound. You could look directly across the top of another mound that often had a huge pole driven right into the middle. So you could look right over the top of the pole and see a specific star set into the horizon or rise from the horizon on a set day of the year at a specific time. And that was a clue for rituals. That is what those were all about. So there are loads of sites, dozens and dozens still in existence, that use the alignments of the mounds and the earthworks. Often they would put outer earthworks. In some cases, the walls would be 20 to 30 feet high, and they would extend for miles and miles. There would be these gaps in these walls, a gap, an opening, and there would be a mound, and from that mound, they would sight directly through that gap, and they could see the horizon a certain time of the day, which was used for rituals. In a lot of the ritualistic sites, they did not build houses in there. The elite probably had some structures, again, on the top of the platform house, but they didn't allow the people to live there. But when you go to these sites today, you'll see a lot of woods, you'll see a lot of trees. You know, they always try to make it park-like. They didn't have that. They didn't have any trees on those mounds, none. They didn't have on the grounds, they didn't have trees growing around on the grounds, and there were no trees around in the horizon. They had a huge open area around all of these places, and they did that through burning. They burned everything to the ground, which they had techniques to do that, which is actually good for agriculture. And part of that was for two reasons. One is they wanted to have the unobstructed sight lines so they could watch from one mound across another, maybe through a gap in a wall, to see the star very clearly go down on the horizon. They didn't want trees blocking it. And the other thing was it allowed for agriculture closer to the main site where they lived. And the third thing was it allowed them to watch the area for invaders, for somebody coming who wasn't supposed to come.
You know,
right.
I mean,
they really cleared the area. People just,
yeah. Okay, so they talk about like I've heard a lot of like rumors or whatever about how there was giant bones or bones and like this, like, so some of them are actually burial mounds. And then
yes.
Yeah, and then like I also find it weird how much of the mounds were just kind of, it doesn't really seem like with reason, were just destroyed. And then I also want to know, I hear the mainstream tells me that they built them with baskets. They just took baskets of dirt and piled baskets and baskets and baskets of dirt. That seems a little, I don't know how to think about that.
Well, okay. So back in 2014, you probably haven't seen this when Andrew and I did this book called Path of Souls. And the subtitle of it
looks really
okay. The subtitle says The Native American Death Journey. Boy, I can't read that myself. Getting old here. Path of Cygnus, Orion, the Milky Way, giant skeletons and mounds in the Smithsonian. So you had a bunch of questions there, how they built them. Well, mainstream archaeology, many, many years ago when they started doing excavations into mounds, and they did, the Smithsonian excavated around 3,000 to 5,000 mounds in the 1800s. Since then, up till roughly 1989, they probably sponsored or had excavated another 3,000 to 5,000. There was a guy by the name of C.B. Moore who obliterated probably 10,000 mounds before the Smithsonian got to it. During the Smithsonian's activities in the late 1800s in their mound exploration project, they uncovered in their early explorations approximately 17 giant skeletons buried in tombs. Usually they're stone tombs inside of burial mounds. These giant skeletons, the largest that Andrew and I were able to definitely confirm, was about 7 feet 8 inches in height. So it would have been a person 7 feet 8 inches tall. Most of the others were roughly 7 feet to that height, 7 feet to 7 feet 8. There were 17 of them. Since then, since the Smithsonian did it, the Carnegie Institute, a number of universities, University of Kentucky sponsored a number of these digs. There have been 20, 30, 40 more of these giant skeletons excavated. The last one that I know of was in 1974 at a place called Chickasaba, which is in Blytheville, Arkansas, near an old SAC Air Force base at Blytheville. And Chickasaba actually had loads and loads of 7 to 8 foot skeletons excavated from it. And archaeologists actually have looked at some of those bones and calculated the height. And yeah, they were 7 feet in height. So it's unusual. I did a statistical analysis of it in this book, Path of Souls. And in that statistical analysis, it's one of every roughly 147,000 people is truly 7 feet tall. One of every 147,000 people. That's not very many. I live in Memphis. We have a population in this immediate area of about 1 million. To my knowledge, there are 3 7-footers here, and one of those is not from America. They're basketball. He's a basketball player, but that's it. It's actually very rare to have somebody that's really 7 feet tall. And most NBA players, they say, are 7 feet tall. They're not. They're 6'10", they're 6'11", and they always fudge the height. That's one of the things that people fudge more than anything else. So statistically, in these burial mounds, there are way, way, way too many giant skeletons. And that led Andrew and I to do a book called Denisovan Origins, which came out in 2019. I've got a copy somewhere here, but it was the book that we did before this new one. And in Denisovan Origins, we traced this newfound branch of humanity called the Denisovans, who interacted with when I say interacted, they interbred with Neanderthals and then modern humans. And almost all of us have some Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA within us. And some areas have far more Denisovan DNA. Well, the Denisovans apparently were a group of exceptionally robust, physically large humans that died out roughly, well, we don't know exactly, but in Europe, they died out approximately 50,000 years ago. But in the South Pacific, the Denisovans probably didn't die out till probably 20,000 years ago. But their ancestors made it to the Americas. Andrew and I believe they were the source of the Clovis culture in America. We also believe that they are the source of all of the myths that Native Americans had about giants. You will find in Native American ethnological literature loads of mythology about giants. And the giants didn't come from the sky. The giants were physical beings. So we believe they were the Denisovan population. So yeah, there were giants in some of the mounds. Most mounds have never been excavated. Loads have been destroyed. There's easily 100,000 mounds left today. So I hope that explained it. I go around a lot. Lots to throw in.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been like really, really great. So tell everybody how they can find you and like what your next big project is and all this good stuff. Give us your closing thoughts here.
Well, to find me, Google my name. That's the best thing. Put in Gregory. Gregory, put my middle initial L Little. Gregory L Little. If you put Greg Little, you find football players. I don't know why there's a lot of football players with the name Greg Little. And even high school football players are more important than him. Yeah, us. Yeah. So anyway, Google my name, Gregory L. Little. You can find it all there. You'll find websites and whatever books or whatever, and contact information will be there. As far as current project, I'm still actively working on books in my real field. I've just finished one up this week. I'm working on another one, and then the next book is on uh, rituals. So yeah, rituals, and why and how they work, so on. So
Like
that's what's coming
people's
next.
rituals or like Native American rituals?
Any rituals,
Oh, okay. All right.
period. It'll have Native American in it, but um, any rituals. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to read that. That's going to be cool.
Yeah. It's not like a cookbook of how to, or move this or, do a sand painting and use this color and all that.
Not a
No,
spell book.
it's not going to be that. It's going to be something. No, no, it's not a spell book. But they do have an effect. Rituals do have an effect. That's for certain. So yeah, that's the next one and all this weird stuff. Not sure when. It'll be within a year, I'm sure.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, you're a very prolific writer, so I don't doubt it.
Uh,
And are you
to
done with
talk
your Atlantis searching? Or are you still going to be doing
Actually, there is supposed to be this month on the History Channel a update to a couple of the shows we did with the series called Mystery Quest. They have some new information that we gave them as far as being done, and that'll show sometime this month. We're not sure when. But they always need new material, and those original shows came out around 2012 or so. So they've updated it with stuff we found since then, but not entirely done. Just focused on other things, and of course the pandemic. I mean, the Bahamas were shut down, travel was shut down for years. So yeah, we're not done. It's just that lots of other things to do,
Yeah, yeah.
and that stuff's exceedingly dangerous. I'm 72 years old. And that stuff, going out in these boats, doing those dives, I did 200 dives alone, which you're not supposed to do, but I did. It's dangerous. A lot of the stuff we did on land was dangerous. My wife and I agree. We were really lucky sometimes because of storms and traveling in small boats through storms. And so it's just dangerous. So there you go. But we're not done.
Well, that's really, really great. One more thing I had to ask real quick. So Hoven Wheat and like Chaco Canyon and stuff like that. You talked a little bit about this at the very beginning of the book, and I forgot to ask you this, but okay, so the EMFs all around us, the soup of crap that we're always in now, especially, which is all, and it's exceedingly getting more and more and more. So
Yep.
do you think that causes more, like, or is this causing us to see more stuff because we're having more interactions with the EMF field, or less? Like, do you think, I mean, but it is also interesting that when you go to these completely isolated, like your cell phone doesn't work and you're grounded to the actual earth places, you have way more of a different connection, and that the people then would have thought differently than they think now because they would have had a completely different tapped in, tuned in signature. Yeah, so do you think that things are amping up towards more apparitions or contacts, or less?
Okay, so that is a really good question too, and it is deep. So first of all, I recommend, like, to do rituals or to interact with it. Go to places like Hoven Weep if you can, or Chaco Canyon, or any place like that. But you got to get away from modern society. You have to get away from noise, and you have to get away from all the electromagnetic interference that's everywhere. So that is an answer to something you didn't really ask. But what you really ask is this: I think that what's happening with all this electromagnetic pollution that's everywhere, it's called electrosmog in the medical literature.
Yeah.
I call it an electromagnetic cesspool. I think it's causing disruptions with us. I think it's increasing the amount of stress and anxiety. I think
Mental
it's
illness.
one. I think it's one of the mental illness. I think it's one of the disruptions. It's disrupting the mental capacity of people who kind of live on an edge. They're on an edge. They sit on a fence, and it doesn't take much to push them from one side of the fence to the other. And so these disruptions are occurring that are causing things like increased ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive active disorder, massive increases in anxiety. People are having more weird experiences. So I think it's causing disruptive experiences. So in order to get away from the disruptive experiences, you have to ground yourself. And I talk about that term in the book repeatedly. It's not just physically grounding yourself in the dirt, but it's getting away from all this electromagnetic, man-made electromagnetic energy around us and immerse yourself in the Earth's ambient electromagnetic field, which is called the Schumann resonance, which helps you reach this state of theta. It gets you into the theta state. These good experiences come right at the cusp of beta to theta brain waves, and that's close to meditation. It's not in deep meditation, but it's right on the edge of it. That is where rituals work. That is where good interactions come with these spiritual forces, whatever they may be. And they can't, then you have to watch your motives. If your motives are not good, you're going to experience a trickster. We didn't talk about that. We don't have time for it. But if your motives are questionable, you're going to interact with a trickster. If your motives are pure, and the Native Americans knew this, they started out, they always expected a trickster to come first in their interactions with this stuff. But if your motives are good and not selfish and are harmonious with nature, it increases the likelihood that you'll have a beneficial experience with the entities that appear.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
Loved it.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Been a pleasure.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.